How's it going, everybody? I'm Jeff Slakey from KMAS, and I've got a great community tour for you. I'm at the Colonial House. A lot of folks know it as that. But before that, you know, somebody's residence, and it's been part of the Green Diamond community and family for a very long time. And I'm happy to have Patti Case here. And one of your last things that you're doing with Green Diamond is to walk us around and show us how you're doing.
I'm great.
It's good to see you.
2 days away from retirement.
That's right. We're filming this just before you're putting the wraps on a glorious tenure of work for Green Diamond. We'll go through some of that, but also talk about the Colonial House. As I mentioned, it wasn't always called the Colonial House. You know, people lived here and it was a residence. So right. As we get going, tell me a little bit about what the house is and how it's become to be part of the community.
Great. So welcome to the Colonial House. This is actually the Reid home. And it was originally the home of Mark Reid and Irene Simpson Reid. So second generation owners of what was then Simpson Logging Company. And they built this amazing 6,000 square foot home in 1920. So just a couple of years ago.
Yeah, not too
I
bad.
was not there, Jeff.
You weren't? Oh,
no, I was not.
I know
Come
you're
on
not.
in.
Come on, Rod. Let's get through here and see. You know, you see it right in downtown Shelton, and it is beautiful. It stands out. It's currently as well used for rental space. As you can see, there's going to be an event here later today. And as soon as you walk in, it's just warm and inviting. And it really kind of speaks to the history of Shelton in so many different ways. Talk to us about what this room is and where we are.
Sure. If you don't mind, I'm going to close the door,
Yeah,
and
no,
then
it'll be cold.
even
It'll
warmer,
be cold
my
in
friend.
there. Bring the cold in here for the folks.
Great. So this is the great room, I guess, and I've always been curious as to how the Reids used this, because by this time, Mark Reid and Irene Simpson Reid had arrived. Let's say it that way. Mark Reid was the general manager of the company and married the boss's daughter back in, I think, 1902, something like that. And so certainly became an heir of the company at that time. And they didn't build this until 1920. So Mark Reid was mayor of Shelton, and then he resigned that position in 1914 when he was elected to the state legislature. And he was in the House of Representatives for 7 terms. He was actually Speaker of the House in 1923, and as such wrote a lot of defining legislation, but I'll come back to that. So this house, built in 1920, as I mentioned, by Mark Reid and Irene Simpson Reid, and it was designed by Joseph Wolub, who's known as the architect of the Capitol. He designed many of the buildings at the state Capitol campus. And here in Shelton, he also designed the county courthouse, the second city hall, which is now our fire department, the old junior high building, the Reid High School, which is now has been replaced by the library. So several of these beautiful buildings, and in Olympia as well. Very prolific architect and had a very bright, shining career here in Washington State. And Mr. Reid was a real patron of Mr. Wolub. So here we are. You can see up here actually a picture of the Reid family, and this was taken a little bit before they were had built this house. But you can see Mr. Reid in the middle there with Irene Simpson Reid. So she was the elder daughter of Saul Simpson, who founded the company. And then we have Saul Reid up top there, Frank and little William G. Reid Sr. is who we know him as. The reason I said it's odd that we have this great room, there's no foyer. If you noticed, you just walk right into the living area. And I can't quite imagine being in any town as the sort of, the patriarch of the town and just, having that.
Walk right in.
Walk right in.
You can see the
sort of
windows all around too, so it is kind of like a fishbowl right in.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But here in the living area, you can see this beautiful wainscoting and that gorgeous staircase, and that's all built out of sweet gum, which came from the American South. Now, why they needed to import wood. Uh, but it's different and it's beautiful, and we've had a lot of it refinished, and it was done so beautifully. So you can imagine they had large events here. They could probably roll back the oriental carpets and shake a leg and have a great time. There was once a pump organ which sat over here, and we have that back in one of the bedrooms now, just to keep it out of the way and keep it from being damaged. But that pump organ came across around the horn with Mrs. Reid's grandmother.
Wow.
Wow. We may be able to see that as well. You can see there's a huge dining room here. And I've sat, something like 14, 16, 18 people around this huge dining table. And we love this balcony, which is, we have many, many pictures of brides throwing their bouquets from that balcony.
Oh my gosh.
So amazing stuff. In fact, some of the first events, well, let me say it this way. So when we reopened the building in the late 90s, some of the first events that we had here were 50th wedding anniversaries for people who were originally married here.
That's cool.
Pretty awesome.
So what was going on between the times of when folks lived here and then the 90s when you said you reopened it? Was it office space or business
Great
space?
question. So the Reids lived here for 10 years. And there's a tragic story that goes along with that, that exit. And they moved to Seattle after their eldest son was killed by a disgruntled worker, and who then turned the gun on himself. Very sad story. At any rate, at that point, Mr. Reid was quoted as saying, "It is too awful to contemplate." And he and his family moved to Seattle. And so they exited the house. It sat empty, basically empty, for about 10 years. The story I've heard is that there was indeed a caretaker during that 10 years, but he basically just let the building languish. So in 1940, Ken Frank and later his wife Kitty were hired as caretakers of the building. And Ken Frank lived to his, well, both he and Kitty lived to their mid to late 90s, and I got to interview them several times about the building. And they walked in, and Ken said, largely it was as the Reids had left it, but with less things.
Sure.
So they filled it up, which was very cool. Kenny was an amazing chef, and people remember the cinnamon rolls that he cooked and a lot of meals over the years in this amazing kitchen here. And the kitchen has been fully remodeled and certainly serves for caterers and such today. But you can imagine Ken slaving away at the commercial stove, which ended up in his house, incidentally. So Kenny and Kitty operated this from 1940 to 1965 as sort of a boarding house, if you will, for visiting Simpson and Rayonier executives. So by 1932, the Rayonier pulp mill had been built. And so both Simpson and Rayonier had folks here in Shelton on a regular basis. In fact, when my dad was hired at Simpson, he was hired in Seattle in 1957 and moved to Shelton with the family in 1960. So I'm not a true native.
Uh-oh.
Shh,
Don't
don't
let that
tell
get out at
anybody. So we moved here when I was 3 years old, and my dad actually lived here for several months.
Oh, wow.
While my mom and my brothers were in school by that time. And so while they moved down, my dad actually lived here. And he did say he gained something like 10 pounds because of the cinnamon rolls.
Because of all the
cinnamon
rolls.
Amazing.
That's funny.
Yeah.
This is a beautiful kitchen. And So when somebody rents this place now, they have access to use all that, and it can seat. It looks like, I mean, it can seat a fair amount of people for a gathering too.
Right, right. I think it seats about 60 in this main room, uh, and then we have some additional room off the main room, and certainly a cocktail arrangement, something like that, upwards of 100 people. So lovely space to be able to use, and certainly can set up a buffet over there, those kinds of things. We've done a lot of charitable events here, as you know, Jeff, and a variety of ways to set things up.
Well, let's go look in some of these other rooms. You said
Sure.
6,000 square feet. You know, when you look at other buildings and homes in downtown, the size, there are some houses that are similar in size. So was that a large home for the time in
Absolutely.
Shelton? I mean,
yeah.
there's a lot of great sizes downtown.
Great little side story. This house that is across the way,
Yeah.
and the house that's up on 3rd and Alder used to be here. So they used to be on this site. And when they built this house, the Reids had this house cut in half. One half was put on this site, one half put on the 3rd and Alder site. And this particular building housed Mrs. Simpson, so Mary Garrett Simpson, nicknamed Holly. Now you know the connection,
okay.
Right? At any rate, no, the locomotive was named after her, not the other way around.
Okay.
At any rate, she lived there after the Reids built this house.
Wow.
So kind of
Isn't
crazy.
that interesting?
And one of the houses definitely has a stairway to nowhere, or used to have a stairway to nowhere. The one on 3rd and Alder, interestingly, functioned as the Christian Science reading room for a number of years. And I remember this because I sang for them when I was in high school. It was a little side gig that I got to do with April Coeur. She was the pianist over there. So at any rate, my point is, Saul Simpson's partner, Alfred Anderson, Anderson Hall at the University of Washington. He was quite an icon in the forestry industry at the time. His wife, Agnes, was a Christian Scientist. So I know there's a connection with all of that.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
And they just cut it in half and moved it around.
Yeah, there you go. Why not, right? Back in the day, I suspect that was a little less expensive than it is today. So you're walking into Mr. Reid's office. And so you'll note that both of these offices have entrances from the outside.
Oh, yeah.
We actually pull people through here, hang up coats, that kind of thing when we have events sometimes. But Mr. Reid's office, he had regular office hours here, as well as regular office hours in his office downtown in the old State Bank building. So, that's 3 blocks away. I want to point out this amazing desk, and you might want to come around back here and see the hardware. Kenny and Kitty Frank had this in their house.
Oh my gosh.
But it was Mr. Reid's original desk. And, the shape of it, the style, pretty typical of the time, but this hardware is pretty unusual, beautiful, original craftsman style hardware.
Wow.
So, yeah.
So how old do you think this desk is then?
It's got to be 1910, 1920, something like that.
That's amazing.
So it's one of the original pieces in the building, which is very cool. This Oriental rug that is in this room also was an original piece. We don't know where it sat, but we found it, and Kenny acknowledged that, yes, indeed, it was original to the house, and we put it in here just to match the decoration. I want to point out a couple of more things about Mr. Reid. I want to point out he was the Speaker of the House, and there's a composite picture of the House of Representatives in 1923, and Mr. Reid is sitting there right in the middle. And I mentioned that he was responsible for some defining legislation. One of the things he did is he was responsible for some of the first workers' compensation law here in Washington State, because he wanted workers who from the woods to be protected if and when there was an accident. And he was also very involved in a national movement to provide insurance for injured for workers in the woods. And that's a picture of a huge group. I believe it was taken in Chicago. And so this is International Woodworkers, and was an insurance group.
So was that something that he brought to the legislature from the company that was being done there, that they said, this is a good thing that we're doing for our workers and all Washingtonians should look at that?
I don't know a lot of detail about that, but indeed, Mr. Reid did protect. He was a bit patriarchal, maybe, for the time, but did protect folks who were injured in the woods. And he had regular visitors in this office and in his office downtown. And from what I understand, he did everything from provide loans to give marital advice. Who knows? It was a different time, definitely.
A little bit of everything.
Yeah.
And then, so what's the office on the other side? Let's go over and see that one.
Come on through. Oh, let me move my bag here.
How much of the items in here would you say are original? I mean, the inlays, of course, are still there, but you said the desk.
Great question. Not a lot of furniture, but certainly a lot of the more permanent pieces of the house, including a lot of the light fixtures. And these lamps with the paper shades, these are original to the house. Many of these fixtures, including this one here, and including the shades on these sconces, we found in the basement.
Wow.
And they had just been set aside and preserved. When we walked in here to do remodeling in the 90s, this was all covered in beautiful fluorescent fixtures and had been functioning as an office since the mid-60s when Kenny and Kitty retired and moved out.
That's interesting. Those are beautiful.
Amazing, huh? And this is actually another one of the original light fixtures. This was Mrs. Reid's office here.
Okay.
And kind of amazing that Mrs. Reid had her own office, and it's the same size as Mr. Reid's office. But Mrs. Reid was active in the community in her own right. She was on the Shelton School Board for many, many years and was a real advocate of education. She started a chapter of PEO, which is an education-facing organization that still exists today in Shelton. It's very cool. They provide scholarships for high school kids.
Come in here, Rod, and get a look at the beautiful artistry up around the corners here. Some peacocks.
Yeah. So this house, this room, originally had a hand-painted peacock frieze. So it was actually deeper, probably about 18 to 24 inches deep, and hand-painted in many bright and garish, frankly, colors around the ceiling. When we removed many, many layers of wallpaper, we found the peacock frieze, but it was quite damaged, and we couldn't find the right combination to repair it. So we put this wallpaper up as sort of a nod to the peacocks. There were originally peacocks on this property. Mrs. Reid was a fan of peacocks. She was a fan of all things Japanese.
Okay.
And Mr. and Mrs. Reid actually traveled to Japan in 1926, and you can find many an article in the Shelton Mason County Journal from that era talking about that trip. I mean, it was kind of a big deal in those days to go to Japan. So this, I should mention that this property was originally 11 acres. So you can imagine the peacocks strutting about.
That's funny.
Yeah, this is actually a picture of Mary Garrett Simpson, Irene's mother.
Okay.
And this is an interesting little photo here. So this is evidently the class of 1925, I believe it is. This is Enzo Loop, and he was superintendent of schools at the time. And Loop Field, of course, is named after him. This backdrop is the old Reid building.
Okay.
This is Emma Richard, who wrote a book about growing up in the Skokomish Valley, ended up becoming Mr. Reid's secretary, but she was a teacher for a period of time. And this guy right here with the glasses on is William G. Reid Sr., so Bill Reid as we know him.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a legacy in the community. Isn't it something?
Indeed.
What's this room over here?
So this is actually Mrs. Reid's bedroom. And as you can see, I mentioned the
Pump piano.
The pump organ earlier. We've removed the bellows in order to keep it safe, but it actually does still work. So we put it in here just to protect it, but we have had tables set up in here during teas and that sort of thing. But Mrs. Reid's bedroom, the two had separate bedrooms, and I always thought it was probably because Mr. Reid snored. But frankly,
well, how come she couldn't be the snorer?
Maybe, very possibly true. That's true. But it was all the thing to have separate bedrooms in the teens and 20s when one could afford it. So that was a way of showing that they had arrived, I guess.
So did these come back from one of their trips to Japan, or from the trip to Japan then?
You know, I don't know the answer to that. Great question, but you can see the peacock theme repeated in these things.
Oh yeah, all through the place.
We've got peacocks. And some of these we found in various spots around the house, and some we purchased. So,
how many rooms are in this place?
There are 8 bedrooms and 6 original bathrooms.
Okay.
And some additional work was done on the bathrooms during Kenny and Kitty Frank's era. This is Mr. Reid's bedroom, and this is my personal favorite light fixture. I think that is amazing.
Oh, yeah, look at
and
that.
Again, we found that in the basement.
Well, the care, I guess, and foresight to put that stuff down there in a protective way, that's pretty special.
Yeah, we found this hall tree in the basement, and all we had to do was polish it.
I mean,
that's the condition it was in.
The level of the work
brought it up
here is amazing.
We were expecting to find bones, but we didn't find any of those. Exploring the basement was a blast, though.
I bet.
Yeah.
What kind of, when the kind of modernization, I guess, with the electricity and different aspects like that, was that difficult to do with the building the way it is, or the age of the building?
So it's my understanding that electricity was original to the house.
Oh.
Although how much, I don't know. I don't think there's been a lot of work done. We certainly updated the wiring when we remodeled. But everybody knows, you know, that is, it's an expensive project, but it needs to be done. And particularly for a house that is this age, that old, wiring is pretty dangerous.
Sure.
You can see that Canyon Creek actually runs right at the edge of the property. And a few years ago, we purchased this, we actually purchased a lot behind us, and there was a house on it. We raised the house, and then Diana Goldie, who was a longtime employee of the company, actually worked with others to design and build this entire backyard. So we can host events out there as well.
Sure. So I mean, this is a multi-story home, right?
Right.
And if these are the bedrooms, what's
Ah,
the rest?
this is only 2 of the bedrooms.
This is amazing.
So
This
come
is
on
so
upstairs.
nice.
The upstairs is not open to the public, but you'll get a rare look at the area. I always stop people on the staircase. I often do these tours with Mason County 3rd graders, and I can fit the entire classroom on this landing, which is pretty amazing. For many years, that organ sat right over here. And I know from Kenny Frank that that wasn't its original position, but when we pulled wallpaper off, we had to move the organ out, of course, and we found that sconce, the area for that sconce, and it had live wiring behind the organ. This is actually an oil painting of Saul Reid, and he was the eldest son of Mark and Irene Simpson Reid. It's my understanding that he always had at least 1, if not 2, German Shepherds with him. And sounds like a really playful and interesting guy. Had risen to be general manager of the company in 1929 when he was shot and killed in front of his brother Frank's home, which is over on 3rd and Birch Street. He was in the process of building the Saul Reid home at the foot of North Cliff Hill. Beautiful home in its own right, and has many similarities with this structure, although newer. But was newly married, was building that home, and this gentleman, his name was Arnold George, and he had been injured in a logging accident and got it in his head that it was all Saul's fault. And he, unbeknownst to very many people, he purchased some kind of a scope and via the Sears catalog back in the day. It'd be just like buying something on Amazon today. Anyway, bought a scope, and he just sat for hours at a time watching that house being built, and really fixated on Saul. So one evening in June, he wheeled himself over from the hospital where he was recovering and where Saul had visited him many times and helped him out. Wheeled himself over to Frank Reid's home and said, "I want to talk to Saul." And Frank said, "Do you want to talk to me too?" And Arnold George said, "No, I want to talk to Saul." And Saul came out on the porch, and Arnold pulled a gun, which he had also bought by catalog, and shot and killed Mr. Reid. He died a couple of hours later at Shelton General Hospital, which had been built by the Reids.
Wow.
And then he, as I mentioned earlier, he turned the gun on himself and shot himself and killed himself instantly. So very sad story.
Sure.
But this is a picture of Saul Reid. More tragedy in the family. Frank Reid and his family moved to Seattle along with Mark and Irene Simpson Reid, and that's when the Simpson headquarters moved to Seattle. But sad story is that Frank and his entire family, wife and 3 children, were all killed in a house fire in 1945. So the youngest son, Bill Reid, whom I've mentioned several times, ended up taking over the company. Never thought he'd be involved in the company. Once told his father that he ought to liquidate, but luckily his father didn't listen.
Oh my gosh.
We actually opened this to our interns during the spring and summer. And so interns who work for the company over the course of typically a quarter get to stay here.
Okay.
So, and this is where they stay. These are the original boys' bedrooms. So 3 children, right? And we know which boy had which room because in the original fuse box, in Bill Reid's writing, it said Saul's room, Frank's room, my room. So this is Bill's room. And you can see again, these are original These are not original. I'm sorry. That is original, but these are not. We really worked hard to make sure that they looked authentic. Each one of the bedrooms.
This is amazing. These here
has a little
what
built-in water closet.
That's so
Isn't that
cool.
amazing? Yeah, and you can see all this. My mother just loved this. All this built-in space.
Yeah.
You know, drawers.
Wow.
There's closet space over here. It's pretty amazing. And all of this is, it's been painted sadly, but all of it is cedar lined so that to preserve clothing. This is actually one of the original Oriental carpets as well. You can see it's seen a little bit of action over the years. And I should point these out. Mrs. Reid collected dozens of woodblock prints from Japan. I assume that she brought them back from Japan from one or more visits. And we've had some of them reframed and such, but they're amazing pieces of art that are hung throughout the building. And this is my personal favorite room. I know it's a bathroom,
but look at this.
The coolest thing ever. It has a 7-headed shower, and that was all the rage in the teens and 20s. And it was said to massage the innards. Oh. So sort of a standing version of a hot tub, I guess.
For sure.
I understand that if you turn on all 7 heads, you run out of hot water in about a minute and a half. But amazing that
But for that minute and a half, it's spectacular.
Yeah, there you go.
That's beautiful.
You may be pummeled to death, but
that's amazing.
So you can see, this has a flat roof. Great idea in a place where it rains 70 inches a year.
Sure.
So there's a skylight in here, and I'll tell a little story about the other skylight in a moment. But this is Frank's room. The middle son got the middle room, of course.
Oh my gosh. That's amazing. This is amazing.
And this is Saul's room. And I mentioned earlier that my family looked at this house with an eye towards purchasing it at one time. This was the room that my sister and I picked out for ourselves. Why we needed to share a room when there were 6 bedrooms, I'm not sure. I can't explain that. But this piece of furniture is a Stickley, and it is original to the home and was left here. I can understand why it was left here because it's uncomfortable. But it's an amazing piece. And you can see all this hand stitched leather.
So 1910, 1920 then?
Probably.
Oh my gosh.
Right. Yeah. Many a body has sat there, right?
I'm sure.
Over the years. Should mention, each of these, originally, each of the rooms around the perimeter had some kind of a balcony. Mm-hmm. And when we started doing the renovations, all of these balconies had been removed because they were literally rotting off the building. And so we had an iron expert come in, look at the pictures, and then rebuild these.
Very neat.
Amazing. Kind of amazing too. Our company is still privately held after 5 generations, and both the chairman of our company, Colin Mosley, and the president, Doug Reid, are great-great-grandsons of Saul Simpson, so great-grandsons of Mark Reid. And they have really been supportive of just maintaining this house and maintaining its existence as a community resource, which is so awesome. Another...
Look at how big. Oh, with the sink in there too.
Yeah, isn't that something?
It is a lot different how, nowadays with the open floor concept versus,
Yeah.
a ton of little rooms here and there.
Yeah, yeah. Although I can certainly understand it because you could close one room off
Yeah.
and not have to heat it so much, right? Well, let's step in here.
What's going on? Boy, this place just does keep going.
Yeah, it does.
Wow.
So this is the billiards room, and there was at one time a billiard table here. I mentioned the skylights.
Mm-hmm.
So when we started working on the house, or even beforehand, this room had been a classroom for our operations improvement division, which existed from the mid 60s to the mid to late 80s. And interestingly, Paul Everett, who was the director of the Operations Improvement Division, is still alive, living here in Shelton. I get an occasional email from him. Anyway, it had not one but two acoustic ceilings, and one of them was a dropped ceiling, so you couldn't see any of this skylight. And I was the only one wearing jeans that day. So I climbed up on a chair and just lifted up the dropped ceiling to see what was above it.
Uh-huh.
And about 250 dead flies fell on me.
Probably,
but
yeah.
I discovered this hole. And there was an original skylight up above it. And it was the traditional peaked skylight in all wood. Well, what actually was the impetus for remodeling the building is that the rainstorm after that ice storm of 1996 caused that skylight to fail. And everything came down and through the building.
Oh, wow.
Damaged the ceiling downstairs, obviously damaged this ceiling and the floor and so on and so forth. So that was the moment where we said, okay, we've got to fish or cut bait here.
Sure.
And so we decided to do the remodel. But I found this skylight, this piece, downstairs in the basement. And we wondered what it was because it's huge, much bigger than any of the door openings around the building. And we discovered, it fits right here just perfectly.
Isn't that something?
So, yeah.
Wow.
This bar originally built out of cherry, and it's our understanding that this was in a saloon in downtown Shelton. And Mr. Reid bought it at the beginning of Prohibition. Probably kept that family in food and housing for about a year. But then it was cut down to this size to fit in this room. And we know exactly where it landed because everything was painted right up to the edge of this. Oh, beautiful piece.
That is, man.
Yeah. So you can imagine the cigar smoke and the three boys and dad, sharing a game of billiards and mom scarce somewhere else in the household. I do this. I mentioned this tour that we do with the third graders, and I always open this armoire, which you can see is just it's a knockoff. It's not a real antique. But I always open this up and I sit all the kids down here and I say, okay, so tell me what in this room is not original to the house. And they never pick the TV.
Well, they probably look at it and go, man, that does look like 100-year-old television.
Looks like a beauty, huh?
These are beautiful kind of Art Deco. I see like the lines.
Yeah, they're a little new to be original to the house. We had them refinished or upholstered by a couple that's no longer here in Shelton. They did an amazing job. But these are probably 1930s pieces. So very possibly they were originally done in horsehair, very possibly purchased by Kenny and Kitty.
Oh, wow.
So the house was built well before there was a highway to Shelton.
Uh-huh.
And in fact, another of Mr. Reid's defining moments in the state legislature, he was responsible, among others, for building out the end of Highway 101, which was around the Olympic Peninsula. And he made sure that it went right through downtown Shelton so that we could take advantage of the economy that it brought with us, with it. But you can imagine that the trip between Seattle and Shelton was a big deal back in those days.
Yeah.
So horse, and for a period of time, there wasn't even a roadway wide enough for a horse and carriage. And the other alternative was the S.G. Simpson stern wheeler, which was a little bit like the mosquito fleet.
Uh-huh.
So people stayed overnight. So this was the guest quarters. And you can see, again, original light fixtures. These are hand painted with roses, very pretty, very feminine. And the guest quarters include, of course, the bedroom. And then you can walk right through the bathroom. And this is all original tile in the bathroom.
Wow.
And then this is the sitting room, my personal favorite place in the entire house. I'm going to pull up a chair. This rocker is original to the house, and it's certainly big enough for Mr. Reid.
Sure.
We had it reupholstered, but this fringe is exactly similar to the original fringe on this rocker. So very odd style for a rocker, but it's really comfortable. Excuse me, I'm just going to take a nap.
Take a nap here as we look through. So did you have a lot of pictures that you were able to go off of if you had to redo these things like this to find originals?
No, actually the only two pictures we had, original pictures, we had one, I shouldn't say, there were three. One picture of the exterior of the house. So we used that to rebuild those balconies, of course. We had a picture of the peacock frieze, but it was in black and white. Not very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have a picture of the fireplace, and all those pictures are placed around the house somewhere. This is an odd little story. These two paintings came to us. So a little old gentleman, probably in his late 70s, early 80s, who came to our office one day, and he had these two paintings in a paper bag. And he said, "These were painted by Mrs. Reid. I want you to have them." You can see there's no signature on the paintings. We know that Mrs. Reid did a lot of watercolor. We don't know whether she did any oil or even experimented in oil, but there is a little bit of similarity. Someday I hope that someone will authenticate that story or refute that story, but until then, they match the room. Yeah. So why not?
Keep them in there for sure. This is amazing.
This also is original to the house, and it's a weird little thing. It's got this drawer. And so one's original thought might be that it was a commode of some sort. This drawer has a false bottom or an open bottom, so you can open it up. It's got a little latch here. And then there's a set of hinges here. And at one time, I was able to open this up, and there's a small opening back behind here, which makes me feel like there was some other function for this.
Yeah, that is interesting.
I've always wanted to take it on the Antique Roadshow
And
and
show
find out
somebody's got
what
to
it was.
know.
But again, it looks like maybe a stickly or, certainly an early craftsman style piece. Again, not terribly comfortable, but interesting piece and was original to the house,
That's
according
great.
to Kenny and Kitty Frank.
That is interesting. What would that be
Yeah.
used for, I wonder?
So we are now entering the servants' quarters,
Okay.
and 2 bedrooms here. There's also this little area back here. This is really interesting. This
And
little area back
these
here.
rooms are still pretty good sizes. I mean,
Yeah.
even considering the inlay closets, I mean, these rooms are still really nice.
Yeah, they are. And this is where Kenny and Kitty lived for the 25 years that they owned the house. They had one son, and he was in that smaller room over here.
Mm-hmm.
This was originally some kind of a sunroom, and this was the thing. They would put a baby in the sunroom to soak up a little sun so that the baby would not become jaundiced.
Okay.
And this is this wall was built later. There was another restroom built into this, but I think this is kind of fascinating and puzzling because they didn't have any babies.
Oh.
By the time they moved into this house, the boys were much older.
Huh.
So, interesting little side story. One story that was shared with me by Wes Johnson, who's now passed on. He was a county commissioner. His wife Peggy was a state representative for a few terms, and they both grew up in the Skokomish Valley. Wes was in some way related to Emma Richard. So the story that I heard is that Mrs. Reid hired young ladies as maids and other help around the house. And she wanted to focus on young ladies who wanted to go to high school, but couldn't otherwise afford to move into town in order to go to high school because there's no way they could commute back in those days. And she had an interesting test for anybody who she hired. She would hire the person on trial, and then she would put a dollar bill. It'd probably be a 20 today.
Sure.
But at any rate, put it underneath one of the oriental carpets. And she would set the person to work cleaning. And if the person didn't find the dollar, she was not hired on because she was not thorough.
Mm-hmm.
If she found it and kept it, she was not hired on because she was not honest.
Sure.
But if she found it and gave it back to Mrs. Reid, she was hired and she was given that dollar as a bonus.
That's cool. Isn't that a story? Is that the water heater or what's that up there?
It is a water
tank.
Yes. And you can see they must have filled the upstairs buckets right here.
Right there.
Yeah. Quite a bathroom and another skylight in the bathroom, which is beautiful. This was originally a dumbwaiter. Its innards have been removed for safety. When we toured this house, as I mentioned, in 1965-ish, my brothers put me in the dumbwaiter and sent me downstairs. I am still scarred. These 2 buzzers right here are all that's left of a whole system that was throughout the house.
Wow.
And the coup de grace when we were touring the house, my parents and my sister and I were downstairs in the kitchen, probably still wondering about, getting locked into the cooler. And my brothers were mucking about upstairs, and one of them pushed one of those buzzers and said, "Hey, Mom, send up dinner." And my mom said, "That's it. We're not buying." So,
I mean, so you really have been here. I mean, you've had ties with this place for a very long time.
yeah, absolutely. And I got to help. I mentioned Diana Goldie earlier. I got to help her remodel and refurnish this house. I remember going on a 2-day spree. Uh, Seattle, Puyallup, Tukwila, I don't know. It was a blur. We bought $26,000 worth of furniture. We bought some at Olson's. And we came back and the place still looked empty after we had filled it up with all that
I
stuff.
bet.
It's amazing, but it was a labor of love, lots of fun. So this is actually, we call it the library or the gymnasium. And it's actually an addition onto the house. So the house, as I mentioned, was originally built in 1920. This was added on, and it's above the garage.
Okay.
It was added on in 1924. Evidently, they didn't have enough room.
They didn't have enough.
But interesting, it's such a beautiful room and so light in here. It's my understanding that Mrs. Reid did her painting here and also did her sewing here, which makes a great deal of sense.
Yeah.
Gymnasium in those days referred to the German word around education, not recreation.
Okay.
And so it's also my understanding that this is a room that they used to tutor the boys. We found it in a state of gray. So it was literally a completely empty room with a gray carpet and gray walls and gray ceiling and gray, gray, gray. And we built in all of this shelving and fireplace element, all clear fur, just beautiful piece. And then, interestingly, Linda Ring Erickson gave us most of these books. And the story goes that Linda had an uncle who passed away and was a contemporary of Mr. Reid's. He was an attorney out of Olympia, I believe, but maybe lived in Elma, which is where Linda grew up. And she just wanted us to have these books. They're all of the same era, which is very cool.
That is cool.
Yeah.
What's great about this too is that, like you said, privately held company, but been in the community forever, and even folks who may or may not have worked for the Simpsons or through the company feel a real tie to this place. I mean, they see it, it's right downtown, and they have another sense of pride of how Shelton kind of came up. It's pretty cool. That's really cool.
It's been interesting over the years as I've given tours of this building. I hear more and more and more stories, so my story gets longer.
Sure.
My apologies for that.
Sure.
This is actually original to the house as well and was probably left behind. It was originally a box piano, so you can see a seam here, but now just a table.
Wow.
And it's a beauty.
Wow.
Yeah. And we have a number of pictures, the original company, some of the original people who started and ran the company. You can see this is a picture of what we fondly call Little Red Camp, which is the logging camp where Simpson Logging Company was founded. And this is Mr. Simpson himself and Mary Garrett Simpson.
Wow. That's amazing.
You just feel like you could walk right up to them, don't you?
Sure.
Oh, yeah. And then there's somewhere along here a picture of a logging camp, and I feel like I can smell it.
Well, Patty, I appreciate you taking us through here.
Sure. Oh, you can see these original, these urns were part of Mrs. Reid's art collection as well.
Okay. Just a fascinating look in.
It's my understanding that there was a great fascination with all things Asian
Sure.
back in the teens and 20s. And you can see a lot of the interior architectural detail has Japanese accents. I mentioned the peacocks. There are those planters outside. Those are original to the house, and they have peacocks on the exterior of each one of the planters. There was actually a little false ceiling in this cabinet, and my dad always told the story that that's where they hid their hooch during the Prohibition. I don't know if that's really true. This is one of two urns that originally sat on the front porch. And I just got to say, I have two sons. There is no way.
Yeah, no.
But the other urn was not damaged by one of the Reids. It was much later that occurred.
That's amazing.
Kenny and Kitty could attest that they survived the Reid family.
It's just a beautiful home.
It surely is.
In so many different ways.
One more story. I have 1,000 stories, sorry. But one more story. Phil Bailey, who was the second generation owner of Mason County Title.
Mm-hmm.
Phil was 96, I believe, when he passed away. He came to Shelton when he was 1 year old with his family on the S.G. Simpson sternwheeler. And his dad founded Mason County Bank and Mason County Title. So Phil was a contemporary of my dad's. He and his wife Virginia and my dad and mom played bridge together. And he told this great story when he was the year that he was Forest Festival Parade Marshal, Grand Marshal. He was here and he came up to this landing and he said, "Oh, I remember when this house was being built." And he said, "I was about 7 years old." And he said, "There was a kid." He said, "I lived downtown. Everybody lived downtown back in those days. There was a kid who was kind of a mischief maker, kind of a little imp, and he was always in trouble for something. And he came up here and he tried to fly out of this bank of windows before the windows were installed. He was not successful in flying and he broke his collarbone. It could have been much worse."
Oh, no. Well, once again, I really appreciate you taking the time to show us around here. This is really cool.
Thanks. I should mention that this room or this building has full Wi-Fi. We do have video and other equipment. It has a screen that I just tucked back up into the beam there. So it's well equipped. And so we do a number of, community meetings, retreats, those kinds of things. So it's rented for business purposes as well as for weddings and other fun occasions.
Well, I appreciate the time taken here today to show us this. And I know that a lot of it, especially the upstairs, not hardly anybody has really seen in many, many years, I think, because, well, obviously, it's still a working building. But that's cool, Patti. You've got a lot of great knowledge here. And I'm really honored that, some of the last things you're doing with Green Diamond here before you start off in your next adventure is to kind of recount this and share this history with us here. It's really awesome.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. I'm a fan of history, and at my age, I'm part of it. So it's a pleasure to show this building off, and thanks for recording this because hopefully it will be part of our record in this generation that future generations will see.
I think so. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome, sir. Pleasure.
Pleasure.